Hi, welcome to the second video lecture of the labor economics, which is actually the first video lecture in which we will we will start covering an actual topic. And this topic is on the labor force participation. This is the first lecture of the first part of the course, in which we will see how labor force is formed. And in the first case, we will look to the participation. I mean, how many people are in the labor force and what are the factors analyzed by neoclassical economists that are determining labor force size. We will also look a little bit background information and see how economists in the past were actually looking to the factors that were determining the labor force size. Anyway, as a starting point, in this COVID crisis, actually, I will talk. There's an interesting case related to labor force participation, especially at the time of the lockdowns. These are the periods where people are enforced or at least encouraged to stay at home. When this was the case, at the times when this was the case, there are certain workers who were officially still part of the labor force, still employed, however, who were not able to go to work, who were not able to work basically. Because their jobs requires them to be at the workplace. So those people, even though they are still officially in the labor force, unofficially they are not in the labor force. There were some people who were still in the labor force, staying at home and working from the home. Our cases like that when the COVID crisis has first started, we had. For a week, I believe, we were in the first group. We did not work. Our whole work was stopped. They said do nothing. At the end of the first week, they said start online education. And after that, we were working online. And there's a third group, which is basically they need to stay at home, they were not able to work, and they were basically their workplace fired them. They remain unemployed in that case. And there's a fourth group, which is called essential workers. So even at the times of the lockdown, and even more so when the government just encourages people to stay at home, they are taken as the people who need to work, and their workplaces also were able to employ them, because even though there was a COVID crisis, their jobs were still active, basically. So they still go to their workplace. In some cases, they also interact with the people at the workplace. For example, healthcare workers are the most obvious example of this, but a surprising group, which is considered usually normally as a low status workers, low wage worker. I said low status, low wage. Their job is considered a job which doesn't require a skill, but at this time they have been taken as one of the essential worker group. Grocery store workers, someone needs to be at the grocery store that you can go and buy food or deliver food to different places. This small video clip is just a news on this essential worker group and their kind of also the dispute on how at the time of the COVID crisis those essential workers should work, how the workplace should be organized, and this time actually the concentration is on the Amazon, which is actually a online bookstore, but it has also warehouses where workers work, and the dispute between workers and the Amazon company on them whether workplace safety measures are sufficient for the Amazon warehouses. But this can start a bigger discussion on the essential workers, and we might ask, basically, I mean, even though labor force participation is usually taken as a participation for the overall labor force, what makes some people in this crisis take risk and work at jobs that make them vulnerable to catch COVID-19? So labor force participation to them, these dangerous jobs. And this idea actually can be even brought into the normal times. I mean, certain jobs are risky, and what are the factors that make some workers to take these jobs? Here, of course, alternatives are also important, but also, even if the possibility, the choices between, as it is in case of COVID crisis, maybe for such workers not working and taking a risky job. I mean, it could be not working, taking a not risky job, and taking a risky job. But assuming that the non-risky jobs are closed and those workers are not able to take the jobs that are in which they can use, in which they can work online. So if the choice is between taking a risky job and taking no job at all, staying at home during the COVID crisis, what makes those workers take those risky jobs? So, which is any job where you have contact with other people in this case. So, we will look to this issue in more detail. For now, I will just ask the question and then stop. And I will do this a lot in this course. I will ask questions and leave some answers to you. Although I will also a little bit use the model to find potential answers to these questions in later parts of this lecture. But anyway, let's start with the background information. So, early economists, I mean, when we are talking about the labor force and the size of the labor force, for the early economists, the problem was stated in this way. They thought there was a segment of population which must work. For them, the choice was between either working or starving. So they start with the pre-assumption that portion of the population certainly will work. So that portion is called labor class, which can be taken as the size of labor class was proportional to the population of a society. The reason is basically they don't have any additional income sources except their wages. And this size of the labor force is set by the size of the population. And how was this population regulated? According to early economists, I mean, which I mean Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Malthus, and Malthus has actually created the most complex model of this view. Let's say, theory or model. Well, basically, the population size is proportional to the wages. When wages are exactly equal for the workers to survive. Here, survival has double meaning. First, the worker should survive himself or herself. When he gets wage, that should be sufficient for him or her to eat and meet its most urgent needs. Plus, he or she should have some additional money necessary to raise a child to replace him or her. So if we are talking about two-person families, I mean mother and father, then they should be able to raise two children to the adulthood to replace themselves. Of course, raising two children to the adulthood to replace themselves might mean at the starting point they might need to have more than two children. Note that in current world the child death rates are very small, but in the even when you go 50 years before, even more so when you go 200, 300 years before, child death rates were very high. So many children were dying before getting to the age where they can have their own children or they can work. As a result, actual number of children should be higher than 2 to just maintain the population at a constant level. Currently, it is that number is very close to 2, even though it is not exactly 2. Average number of children per two-person family or two-person family, basically, which is also called the fertility rate, because each woman should have 2 children in that case, since man cannot become pregnant. If wages are higher than this amount, according to these 3 economists, workers will have more children, which will increase population and labor force size, which will create an excess supply of labor, which will decrease the wages, increase the supply of labor, which will decrease the wages, back to the point at which the wages is just enough for survival. Because when the wages equal to just enough for survival, then basically the workforce will remain stable. I mean, the size of the workforce will remain stable. So if the wage fall below this amount, then the workers will have less than 2 children. In extreme cases, they might die. Or even if they have more than 2 children, I mean, less than 2 will reach survival to adulthood. Survive to the adulthood. In that case, the work size will shrink up to the point that when wage will become just sufficient for the workers to survive and raise a child to replace themselves. So, according to these 3 economists, basically, workforce remains constant when wage level is equal to the point where workers, where it meets just the needs of a worker and his one child to survive. So this is the earliest idea. Marx argued that population size is not the dominant variable that adjusts the labor force and wages. According to him, basically the labor force needs a huge reserve force, which consists of unemployed people, but also some certain people outside of the labor force who potentially can join to the labor force, and also the partially employed people. And he also argues that mostly most of the workers who don't have any additional income source needs to work. So workforce is consists of whole labor class, according to him. But according to him, wages are basically regular. Wages are not related to the size of the workforce and population increase. It is rather related to the size of the reserve army, or you might also say this idea is more or less parallel to the idea wages are related to the unemployment, basically. Let's stop here, by the way. We are very close to the 15 minutes mark. This is the first part of this Thus,